Sometimes the smallest box in the room is carrying the heaviest memory. The laughter started before Ryan Whitmore even touched the gift. Warm golden light spilled across the enormous Manhattan penthouse, while crystal chandeliers reflected against walls of glass overlooking Central Park 30 floors below. The city shimmered like a field of diamonds beneath the December night sky. But inside the penthouse, the air smelled of expensive whiskey, polished marble, and the quiet arrogance that followed powerful people everywhere they went. Ryan stood near the center of the room, surrounded by investors, celebrities, hotel executives, and socialites dressed in black tuxedos and glittering gowns. At 42, the CEO of Whitmore Holdings looked exactly like the magazines described him. Sharp jawline, tailored charcoal suit, silver watch worth more than most people's yearly salary. A man built entirely from discipline and control. Tonight was supposed to be simple. A birthday party organized by his board members to celebrate another year of expansion, another record-breaking quarter, another headline about the unstoppable empire he built after inheriting his father's struggling hotel company 15 years earlier. One by one, guests stepped forward with extravagant gifts wrapped in silk ribbons and glossy paper. A French investor presented him with a rare bottle of scotch aged 50 years. Another guest offered custom cufflinks made from white gold. Someone else delivered an Italian watch inside a velvet box while the room admired it loudly enough to sound rehearsed. Ryan accepted each gift with the same detached half-smile he always wore at events like this. Polite, empty, predictable. Then his assistant approached quietly, holding one final package. Small, plain, wrapped in brown paper with no ribbon at all. The room immediately noticed the difference. "And this one?" Ryan asked casually. His assistant lowered his voice slightly. "From one of the waitresses downstairs, sir." Several guests exchanged amused looks almost instantly. Ryan raised one eyebrow before taking the tiny box into his hands. It weighed almost nothing. "A waitress?" someone repeated nearby with visible amusement. Ryan looked down at the cheap paper wrapping and smirked faintly. "What is this?" He lifted the box slightly toward the room. "Did the waitress wrap me a bakery coupon?" Laughter exploded around the penthouse immediately. Loud, effortless. The kind of laughter rich people used when mocking something beneath them felt socially acceptable. Ryan barely reacted to it. He simply turned the small box over once in his hands with mild curiosity. Then his eyes lifted across the room toward the service staff standing quietly near the dining area. That was when he saw her. Emily Carter stood near the champagne table, holding an empty silver tray against her black uniform. Blonde hair tied loosely back, minimal makeup, calm blue eyes that did not match the embarrassment everyone expected her to feel right now. Most people would have looked humiliated, defensive, angry. But Emily simply stood there quietly while the room laughed around her, as though she had already learned long ago that people with money often confused cruelty with humor. Ryan tilted his head slightly. "Which one of you gave me this?" Emily stepped forward carefully through the crowd. "I did, sir." The room grew quieter now that the target of the joke had a face. Ryan studied her for a second. She looked older than most servers working events like this. Maybe late 20s. Composed in a way that felt unusual. "You know," Ryan said lightly while holding up the tiny package, "this might officially be the most mysterious gift here tonight." Another wave of laughter moved through the room. Emily smiled politely, though something about her expression remained untouched by the humiliation surrounding her. "You can open it later," she said softly. Ryan frowned slightly at that answer. "Later?" Emily nodded once. "It is probably better that way." Ryan glanced at the tiny package again. Brown paper. No expensive branding. No luxury ribbon. In a room filled with wealth loud enough to echo off glass walls, the little box looked almost absurd. "Come on, Ryan," one investor called from the bar. "Open it now. We all need entertainment after those boring cufflinks." More laughter followed. Ryan almost opened the box right there just to satisfy the room. But something about Emily's calmness stopped him unexpectedly. She did not seem nervous. She did not look desperate for approval. If anything, she looked strangely certain about something only she understood. Ryan noticed that immediately, and for reasons he could not explain, it irritated him slightly. He handed the box carelessly toward a nearby side table beside the champagne buckets. "Maybe later," he said with a dismissive shrug. The party quickly moved on. Music swelled softly through hidden speakers while servers carried trays of lobster appetizers and crystal glasses through the crowd. Conversations shifted back toward stock markets and luxury vacations and hotel acquisitions in Miami. The tiny box disappeared into the background almost instantly, but Emily's eyes drifted toward it once more before she quietly returned to work. Ryan noticed that too. Throughout the rest of the evening, he found his attention returning toward her more often than expected. She moved calmly through the penthouse, refilling drinks and clearing plates while guests barely acknowledged her existence. One woman snapped her fingers impatiently for another champagne refill without even looking up from her conversation. A man in a navy tuxedo handed Emily an empty glass like she was part of the furniture. She accepted every interaction with the same composed silence. No bitterness, no performance, just quiet dignity wrapped in exhaustion. Near midnight, snow finally began falling outside the massive penthouse windows, soft white flakes drifting across the Manhattan skyline, while the party slowly thinned into smaller conversations. Ryan stood alone near the balcony, now nursing a glass of bourbon he had barely touched all evening. The city below looked distant tonight, cold somehow. His assistant approached carefully beside him. "Your car is ready whenever you want, sir." Ryan nodded absently. Then his eyes landed once more on the small brown package still sitting forgotten beside the champagne station across the room. Everyone else's expensive gifts had already been moved upstairs by staff members, but the cheap little box remained exactly where he left it. Alone, Ryan stared at it for a moment longer while snow continued falling beyond the glass. Then slowly, almost out of boredom more than curiosity, he crossed the room toward it. Ryan Whitmore picked up the small brown package with one hand while the last guests drifted through the penthouse saying polished goodbyes near the elevators. Snow continued falling softly beyond the giant glass windows, covering Manhattan in white silence 30 floors below. Somewhere behind him, jazz music still played through hidden speakers, though quieter now, almost tired after hours of expensive laughter. The little box felt strangely light in his hand. Cheap paper wrapping. Ordinary tape. No ribbon. No logo. In a room where people measured worth through price tags and brand names, the package looked almost embarrassingly out of place. "You are really opening it?" one of the investors asked while slipping on his overcoat near the marble bar. Ryan glanced over with faint amusement. At this point, curiosity seems cheaper than therapy. A few tired laughs followed. Ryan turned the box over once more beneath the warm penthouse lights. Then slowly, almost carelessly, he peeled back the brown paper wrapping. The room nearby continued moving around him without interest. Staff members cleared champagne glasses. A pianist near the lounge packed away sheet music. Emily Carter quietly stacked empty dessert plates near the dining table without once looking toward Ryan. That caught his attention more than he expected. Most people would have watched nervously after being publicly mocked by a billionaire in front of half of Manhattan. But Emily acted like the outcome no longer belonged to her. Ryan removed the lid from the box. Inside rested another smaller object wrapped carefully in soft white cloth. His expression shifted slightly. Not impressed, just confused now. He unfolded the cloth slowly, then paused. A silver watch rested in his palm. Old, scratched, worn from years of use. The leather strap had faded nearly brown with age, and one of the hands no longer moved properly. Ryan almost laughed under his breath. Of course, a broken watch. Around him, nobody paid attention anymore. But Ryan stared down at the object a second longer than expected. Something about it felt strangely familiar. He turned the watch carefully beneath the chandelier light. Then his breathing stopped completely. His fingers tightened around the metal, so suddenly the room itself seemed to disappear around him. Because engraved faintly across the back were words he had not seen in almost 20 years. "To my son Ryan, time matters less than people. Dad." The penthouse became silent inside his head. Ryan stared at the engraving while an old memory struck him with brutal clarity. Summer, Connecticut, age 12. His father kneeling beside a dock near the family lake house laughing while fastening that exact watch around his own wrist after closing another hotel deal. "A good watch reminds you what matters," his father had said. Ryan felt his chest tighten painfully. No, impossible. He looked down again. The tiny scratch near the left corner. The worn silver crown. even the cracked leather stitching. It was the same watch. The one his father wore the night he died. Ryan's pulse slowed strangely. For years, he believed the watch disappeared forever after the funeral. Police assumed it was lost during the chaos at the hospital. His mother searched for weeks afterward before finally giving up. Ryan swallowed hard, suddenly aware that his hand was trembling. "Sir?" His assistant Daniel stepped closer immediately, noticing the change in his expression. "Are you all right?" Ryan barely heard him. Beneath the watch rested a folded piece of cream-colored paper. Old, slightly yellow around the edges. Ryan unfolded it carefully with stiff fingers. The handwriting was unfamiliar but neat. "Mr. Whitmore, my father wanted to return this many times. He kept saying it belonged with your family. But life moved faster than he expected. Before he passed away last winter, he asked me to make sure you received it personally. He said your father dropped it in the back seat of the car the last night they spoke." Ryan stared at the words while a low ringing filled his ears. The last night they spoke. Suddenly, another memory surfaced without warning. Rain against black car windows. His father loosening his tie after dinner while discussing a business trip to Las Vegas. Ryan sitting beside him, distracted by stock reports and investor calls, even though his father kept trying to continue the conversation. "You work too much," his father had joked softly that night. Ryan remembered barely looking up from his phone. "That is rich coming from you." His father laughed quietly. "Maybe. But at least I learned eventually." Ryan closed his eyes briefly. That was the last dinner they ever shared before the heart attack 2 days later. He never remembered seeing the watch afterward. "Ryan." Daniel's voice sounded distant now. Ryan slowly lifted his head. Across the penthouse, Emily stood near the service table, placing folded linens into a black storage bin. Calm, quiet, unaware that the entire world inside him had just shifted. Ryan looked back down at the watch again. The room around him suddenly felt unbearable. Too loud, too expensive, too artificial. All evening people handed him gifts worth tens of thousands of dollars, but none of them meant anything now compared to the broken silver watch resting in his hand. Because this tiny object carried something he could never buy back. Time. Lost time. His father's voice. Regret. Ryan looked toward Emily once more. This time not as a waitress, not as background noise at one of his parties, but as the woman standing quietly in the middle of a room full of wealth after returning the only thing that had made him feel close to his father again in nearly 2 decades. Emily finally glanced up and noticed his expression for the first time that night. Their eyes met across the penthouse. Ryan could not speak. He simply stared at her while snow continued falling softly beyond the glass walls of Manhattan, and the broken watch rested silently against his trembling hand. The penthouse no longer sounded the same to Ryan Whitmore after he opened the box. The music drifting through hidden speakers felt distant now, hollow somehow. Conversations near the elevators blurred into meaningless noise while snow continued falling softly beyond the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. Ryan stood motionless beside the champagne station, holding the old silver watch in one hand and the folded letter in the other, while his entire chest tightened with memories he had spent years avoiding. "Sir." Daniel stepped closer carefully again. "Should I call someone?" Ryan barely shook his head. His eyes never left Emily Carter across the room. She had returned to stacking empty glasses near the dining table as though nothing extraordinary had happened at all. No expectation, no pride, no attempt to explain herself. That unsettled him more than anything. Most people in this city wanted something from him. Attention, money, influence, recognition. But Emily had handed him back a missing piece of his father and then quietly returned to work. Ryan slipped the letter carefully into the inside pocket of his suit before walking slowly across the penthouse toward her. His expensive shoes moved softly across marble floors while the remaining guests gradually noticed the change in atmosphere around him. Something about Ryan's expression had shifted completely. The arrogance from earlier was gone now. In its place remained something heavier. Human. Emily looked up when he stopped beside the service table. Up close, Ryan noticed how tired she looked beneath the warm chandelier light. Not weak, just exhausted in the way people become after carrying responsibilities too long without complaining about them. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly, lifting the watch slightly. Emily glanced down at it gently. "My father kept it in a small drawer beside his bed for almost 17 years. Ryan swallowed hard. "Your father was my father's driver?" Emily nodded once. Thomas Carter. The name hit Ryan instantly. A faint memory surfaced through the fog of years. A tall man with kind eyes driving black sedans through rainy Manhattan mornings while Ryan sat in the back seat answering business calls before he was even 30 years old. I remember him, Ryan said softly. Emily gave a small sad smile. Most people did not. Something about that answer tightened inside Ryan's chest. Emily folded another linen napkin carefully before continuing. My father worked for your family for almost 20 years. Ryan looked back down at the watch in silence. Emily's voice remained calm. The night your father passed away, he found the watch in the back seat after dropping him off at the hospital. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. Hospital lights flashed through his memory now. Cold white hallways. Doctors speaking too softly. His mother crying quietly near the elevators while Ryan kept checking his phone because investors from Las Vegas were waiting for updates on a contract. God, the contract. Ryan felt suddenly sick remembering it. Emily continued gently. My father tried returning the watch several times afterward. Ryan opened his eyes slowly. Why did he not? Emily hesitated for the first time. Because after the funeral, you disappeared very quickly. Ryan stared at her. Emily lowered her gaze politely before continuing. My father said you looked unreachable. The word landed harder than accusation would have. Unreachable. Ryan looked around the enormous penthouse filled with crystal glasses and imported furniture and silent employees cleaning up someone else's luxury. The room suddenly felt painfully accurate. He had spent years building walls so high nobody could touch him anymore. Even grief had to stand outside waiting for permission to enter. He should have contacted my office, Ryan said quietly, though even to himself the words sounded weak. Emily gave a faint, almost sympathetic smile. My father was a driver, Mr. Whitmore. She folded another napkin carefully between her hands. Men like him usually do not believe billionaires are waiting for their phone calls. Ryan had no response to that. Because she was right. Emily finally looked directly at him again. After my father got sick last year, he asked me to promise I would return it personally someday. Her voice softened slightly now. He said your father loved that watch more than anything he owned. Ryan stared down at the worn silver scratches along the edge of the case. His father wore it every day. At business dinners, fishing trips, family vacations, even during chemotherapy treatments near the end. Suddenly Ryan remembered the last conversation they ever had clearly enough to hurt. They had argued quietly inside the hospital hallway because Ryan wanted to fly to Las Vegas for a deal instead of staying overnight. You always think there will be more time, his father had said tiredly. Ryan remembered answering coldly. That is how business works. His father only nodded sadly after that. 2 days later, he was gone. Ryan tightened his grip around the watch until the metal pressed against his palm. My father waited for me that night, did he not? Emily looked at him carefully, then softly nodded. According to my father, yes. The truth settled over Ryan like cold winter air. For years he convinced himself missing those final hours had been unavoidable, necessary, important for the company. But suddenly all those excuses sounded hollow compared to the broken watch resting in his hand. Across the penthouse, the last guests finally disappeared into elevators while staff dimmed the lights near the dining area. Snow continued drifting silently outside the windows. Emily picked up an empty tray and adjusted it against her hip. I should finish cleaning before the night crew leaves. Ryan looked at her almost stunned by her normalness after handing him something so emotionally devastating. Emily. She paused. Ryan searched for words that suddenly felt too small. I laughed at you earlier. Emily remained quiet. Ryan lowered his eyes briefly. And everyone followed me because that is what people do around money. Emily studied him calmly for a second before answering. People usually reveal themselves when they think someone beneath them cannot hurt their reputation. Ryan felt that sentence settle uncomfortably deep inside him. Because tonight she had seen exactly who he became in rooms full of power. Emily shifted the tray slightly in her arms. For what it is worth, my father always said your father was kinder than the people around him. Ryan looked down again at the watch. The ticking mechanism was broken. Frozen at 11:47 forever. Yet somehow it still felt more alive than anything else inside the penthouse. By 1:30 in the morning, the penthouse had finally emptied into silence. The chandeliers still glowed softly above polished marble floors, but without the noise of investors and champagne laughter. The space felt strangely hollow. Staff members moved quietly through the room, collecting glasses and extinguishing candles, while snow continued drifting past the giant windows overlooking Manhattan. Ryan Whitmore stood alone near the balcony, holding the broken silver watch in his hand, as though afraid it might disappear again if he loosened his grip for even a second. He had not stopped staring at the engraving since Emily gave it to him. Time matters less than people. Dad. The words felt cruel now. Not because his father wrote them, but because Ryan finally understood how completely he ignored them while the man was alive. Sir. Daniel approached carefully beside him. The cleaning crew is asking when they can close the upper level. Ryan blinked slowly, pulled back from memory. Right. His voice sounded rougher now. Tired. Tell them they can finish. Daniel nodded, though his eyes briefly drifted toward the watch. Was it really your father's? Ryan looked down at it again. Yeah. Daniel hesitated before speaking carefully. I have worked for you 8 years. Ryan glanced toward him. And? Daniel lowered his voice slightly. I have never seen you look at anything the way you were looking at that watch. Ryan gave a faint, humorless smile. That probably says something terrible about me. Daniel almost answered, but stopped himself. Ryan understood why. People around powerful men learned quickly which truths stayed dangerous to say aloud. Across the penthouse, Emily Carter pushed a cleaning cart slowly toward the dining area while folding black table linens with practiced efficiency. She moved quietly through the enormous room like someone used to being invisible in luxury spaces. Ryan watched her for a long moment before suddenly speaking again. Daniel. Yes, sir. Ryan looked toward Emily. Go home. Daniel blinked in surprise. Are you sure? It is late. Daniel hesitated briefly before nodding. Good night, sir. Ryan waited until the elevator doors closed behind him before crossing the penthouse slowly toward the dining area. Emily noticed him approaching almost immediately. You are still here, she said softly while placing folded napkins into a storage bin. Ryan glanced around the empty penthouse. Apparently so are you. Emily gave a faint smile. People with normal jobs usually clean up after billionaire parties. Ryan almost smiled back, though guilt still lingered too heavily inside him for humor to feel comfortable yet. He looked at the silver watch again. I cannot stop thinking about him. Emily rested both hands lightly against the cleaning cart. Your father? Ryan nodded once. Snow reflected softly across the windows behind him while silence settled between them for a moment. You know the strange part? Ryan said quietly. For years I convinced myself I remembered him perfectly. His eyes lowered toward the frozen watch hands. But tonight I realized most of my memories are about business meetings and schedules and things he built. Emily listened carefully. Ryan continued more softly now. I barely remember ordinary moments anymore. Emily's expression softened with understanding. Those are usually the first memories grief steals. Ryan looked up at her. Emily adjusted a folded towel carefully between her hands. Big moments survive because people repeat them constantly. Funerals, hospital visits, last conversations. Her voice remained calm. But small memories disappear quietly if nobody protects them. Ryan stared at her for a second. Your father taught you that? Emily shook her head gently. Losing him did. The penthouse grew quieter as the remaining staff disappeared into elevators one by one. Soon only distant city sounds remained beneath the snowfall outside. Ryan walked slowly toward the piano near the lounge area and sat down heavily on the black bench without playing. The silver watch rested against his palm beneath the chandelier light. My father used to play piano badly after too much whiskey, he said suddenly. Emily smiled faintly. Badly? Ryan nodded. Terribly. For the first time that night, a real warmth entered his voice. He only knew 4 songs, but he played them like he was performing at Carnegie Hall. Emily leaned lightly against the dining table nearby. What happened after he passed away? Ryan stared at the silent piano keys. I buried myself in work. He let out a slow breath. Everyone kept calling me strong because I returned to the office 3 days later. His jaw tightened slightly. But honestly, I think I was just afraid that if I stopped moving, I would have to feel everything. Emily understood that immediately. Some people grieved loudly. Others turned themselves into machines because silence hurt too much. Ryan glanced toward her again. Did your father ever talk about mine? Emily nodded softly. Sometimes. Ryan waited. Emily looked toward the snowy windows before continuing. He said your father always stayed in the front seat with him instead of the back whenever they drove late at night. Ryan blinked slowly. Really? Emily smiled gently. My father liked that. Ryan stared down at the watch again as another painful realization surfaced quietly inside him. There were entire versions of his father that other people knew better than he did. Kindnesses, habits, conversations, moments he missed because he was always somewhere else chasing something bigger. I spent 15 years building this company into the largest hotel group on the East Coast, Ryan said quietly. And somehow tonight a waitress handed me the only thing that has felt real in years. Emily looked at him calmly. Maybe because grief does not care how successful someone is. Ryan laughed softly under his breath. Not amused, just exhausted by the truth of it. The snow outside deepened against the glass while the city lights blurred beneath white winter haze. Emily stepped closer slowly before reaching into the pocket of her apron. There is something else. Ryan looked up. Emily carefully unfolded a small photograph worn around the edges from age. My father kept this beside the watch. Ryan took the photograph carefully. His breath caught instantly. It showed his father standing beside a black sedan in winter clothes, smiling broadly, while Thomas Carter stood beside him, holding 2 paper coffee cups. Both men looked relaxed. Ordinary. Alive. On the back of the photograph, written in faded blue ink, were 4 simple words in his father's handwriting. Best conversations happen quietly. Ryan Whitmore did not sleep that night. Long after the penthouse lights dimmed and the cleaning crews disappeared into silent elevators, he remained alone beside the piano with the broken silver watch resting in one hand and the faded photograph in the other. Snow continued falling outside the giant windows, soft white flakes drifting across Manhattan, while the city below slowly disappeared beneath winter silence. Best conversations happened quietly. His father's handwriting looked smaller than Ryan remembered. Older somehow. Fragile in a way fathers are never supposed to seem when their children are young enough to believe strength lasts forever. Ryan leaned back slowly against the piano bench and closed his eyes. Suddenly he could hear his father laughing again inside old memories he had buried beneath 15 years of meetings and quarterly reports and billion-dollar expansions. Late-night drives through Connecticut, coffee cups balanced on dashboard lights. His father talking casually with Thomas Carter while Ryan sat distracted in the back seat answering emails even on weekends. God, he barely looked up back then. Sir, the voice startled him softly. Ryan opened his eyes. Emily Carter still stood near the dining area beneath the warm chandelier light, holding her coat over one arm now that her shift had finally ended. He glanced toward the clock on the wall. Almost 3 in the morning. You are still here, he said quietly. Emily smiled faintly. So are you. Ryan looked down again at the photograph. I forgot how he smiled. Emily's expression softened. My father used to say your dad smiled most when nobody important was watching. Ryan let out a slow breath through his nose. That sounded exactly right. Somewhere along the way, his father stopped smiling in boardrooms and started smiling during ordinary conversations with drivers and hotel cooks and maintenance workers. Ryan understood that now in a way he never did before. Emily stepped closer toward the piano slowly. My father liked him very much. Ryan glanced up. Really? Emily nodded once. He said your father treated people like they mattered even when nobody else in the room noticed them. The words settled painfully inside Ryan because he knew exactly how different people described him instead. Efficient, brilliant, untouchable, demanding. Men like Ryan Whitmore earned respect through results, not warmth. He built an empire powerful enough to make newspapers call him visionary, while quietly becoming someone his own father might barely recognize anymore. Emily looked toward the giant snow-covered windows. The funny thing is, she said softly, my father never talked about how rich your family was. Ryan listened carefully. Emily continued. He talked about your father bringing extra coffee during winter mornings because he knew my dad skipped breakfast to save money. Ryan stared at her silently. He remembered birthdays, asked about my school grades, helped my father pay for my mother's surgery once without telling anyone. Emily smiled faintly at the memory. That is who my father admired. Ryan felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. Not because of guilt anymore, because suddenly he realized the people who truly knew his father remembered kindness first. Not success, not hotels, not wealth, kindness. Ryan lowered his gaze toward the frozen watch hands resting against his palm. 11:47 forever. The exact time his father entered the hospital the final night. Emily noticed him staring at it. My father tried fixing it once, she said softly. Ryan looked up. He did. Emily nodded. But after replacing the battery, it still would not move. Her eyes drifted toward the watch carefully. He said, maybe some things stop when the person wearing them disappears. Silence settled gently around them. Outside, snow continued covering Manhattan in soft white stillness, while the city lights glowed faintly beneath winter haze. Ryan rubbed one hand slowly across his face, exhausted now in a way sleep could not fix. Do you ever feel like grief freezes certain parts of your life? He asked quietly. Emily looked at him for a moment before answering. Every day. Ryan leaned forward slightly on the piano bench. Emily rested one hand against the back of a nearby chair. After my father passed away, everyone expected me to move on quickly because I was already an adult. Her voice remained calm but honest. But grief does not care how old you are. Ryan understood that immediately. People told me work would help. Emily smiled sadly. Did it? Ryan looked down at the watch again. It helped me avoid feeling things. Emily nodded softly like she already knew the answer. Somewhere far below the penthouse, a siren echoed faintly through the snowy streets before disappearing into the city night. Ryan stared at the silent piano keys beside him. My father wanted me at dinner that night. Emily stayed quiet. Ryan continued more softly. I remember him asking me 3 times to stay longer before my flight. He swallowed hard. I told him business could not wait. Emily's eyes softened with quiet understanding. Ryan laughed bitterly under his breath. Turns out neither could death. Neither of them spoke for a moment after that. Some truths arrived too heavy for immediate comfort. Finally, Emily stepped closer toward the piano and rested the photograph carefully beside him. My father blamed himself for a long time. Ryan frowned slightly. Why? Emily looked toward the windows. Because he drove your father to the hospital instead of calling an ambulance immediately. Ryan shook his head instantly. That was not his fault. Emily nodded gently. I know. Her expression grew distant now. But grief makes kind people carry responsibilities that never belong to them. Ryan stared at her carefully then. Really carefully for the first time. The calmness in her voice. The exhaustion hidden beneath grace. The quiet wisdom shaped by loss instead of bitterness. Emily Carter did not sound like someone broken by life. She sounded like someone who survived it honestly. Ryan looked around the enormous penthouse filled with imported art and luxury furniture, suddenly feeling embarrassed by how empty it all seemed tonight. You know, he said quietly, every person at this party brought me something expensive. Emily gave a faint smile. That usually happens at billionaire birthdays. Ryan shook his head slowly while lifting the old silver watch slightly beneath the chandelier light. And somehow the only gift I will remember came wrapped in brown paper. The sun had not fully risen when Ryan Whitmore finally left the penthouse. Manhattan looked pale and quiet beneath fresh snow while black cars moved slowly through empty streets still glowing with reflections from traffic lights and storefront windows. Ryan sat alone in the back seat of his town car holding the old silver watch against his palm while the city passed silently outside. He had canceled 3 morning meetings before dawn, then 4 more before sunrise. By 7 o'clock, Daniel stopped asking questions and simply rearranged the schedule without argument. Something important had shifted inside Ryan during the night, and everyone around him could feel it even if nobody understood why. Where to, sir? The driver asked softly. Ryan stared out the window for several seconds before answering. Connecticut. The driver glanced at him through the mirror, surprised. The lake house. Ryan nodded once. Snow drifted gently across the windshield while the car pulled onto the highway, leaving Manhattan behind. Ryan loosened his tie slowly and leaned back against the leather seat, exhausted in a way no amount of sleep could repair. The old watch rested silently in his hand, frozen forever at 11:47. He had spent 15 years pretending time belonged to him because success made people feel temporarily invincible. But somewhere between quarterly reports and luxury penthouses, Ryan forgot the cruelest truth about time. It never waits for anyone to become less busy. Nearly 3 hours later, the car rolled slowly through the gates of the Whitmore Lake house buried beneath fresh snow and winter silence. Ryan stepped outside into cold air sharp enough to sting his lungs. The house looked exactly the same. Gray stone walls, tall pine trees surrounding the frozen lake. Smoke drifting faintly from the chimney because the caretaker still visited every weekend even though Ryan barely came anymore. He stood motionless in the driveway for a long moment before finally walking toward the front porch. The old wooden floor creaked beneath his shoes exactly the way it did when he was 12 years old running inside after fishing with his father during summers that now felt impossibly distant. Inside, the lake house smelled like cedarwood and old books and memories nobody had touched in years. Ryan removed his coat slowly while silence settled around him. The caretaker, an older man named Walter, appeared from the kitchen looking startled. Ryan. Ryan nodded faintly. Morning, Walter. Walter blinked in confusion. You usually call before coming. Ryan glanced around the quiet room. I know. Walter studied his face carefully for a second. Everything all right? Ryan almost answered automatically. Yes. Fine. Busy. The same empty words powerful men used when truth felt inconvenient. But instead he looked down at the silver watch in his hand and quietly said, Not really. Walter said nothing after that. Some people understood grief without needing explanations. Ryan walked slowly through the house, toward his father's old study near the lake windows. Dust floated through pale morning light, while shelves of leather books lined the walls untouched for years. His father's chair still sat near the fireplace exactly where it always had. Ryan lowered himself into it heavily while snow drifted softly beyond the frozen lake outside. Then he looked down again at the broken watch. You know, Walter said gently from the doorway, your father used to sit there every morning before sunrise. Ryan glanced up. Walter smiled faintly at the memory. Coffee. Newspaper. Same terrible jazz records every day. Ryan almost laughed softly under his breath. Yeah, he loved bad jazz. Walter nodded. Said silence made people forget they were alive. Ryan's chest tightened unexpectedly at the sentence. Because lately silence was all his life had become. Meetings without emotion. Luxury without warmth. Success without rest. Ryan looked around the study carefully. Framed photographs still covered the shelves. Fishing trips. Christmas mornings. Family dinners. His father smiling beside ordinary moments Ryan barely remembered being present for. One photograph stopped him completely. His father standing beside Thomas Carter near the lake dock, both men holding fishing poles while laughing at something outside the frame. Ryan stared at it quietly. Walter noticed immediately. Thomas was a good man. Ryan nodded slowly. His daughter returned something important to me last night. Walter stepped closer curiously. Ryan held up the silver watch. Walter's eyes widened instantly. Good Lord. Ryan looked at him sharply. You remember it? Walter laughed softly in disbelief. Your father wore that thing every day for 20 years. He stepped closer toward the watch carefully. After he passed away, your mother searched this entire house looking for it. Ryan lowered his eyes again. Apparently, he lost it in the car the night he went to the hospital. Walter grew quiet after hearing that, then gently asked, And Thomas kept it all this time? Ryan nodded once. Walter stared toward the snowy lake outside thoughtfully. That sounds exactly like him. Ryan rubbed one hand slowly across his jaw. Emily said her father tried returning it. Walter looked back toward him. Then why did he not? Ryan hesitated before answering quietly. Because I disappeared. The truth sounded uglier out loud somehow. Walter remained silent for several seconds before finally speaking carefully. After your father died, you stopped coming here. Ryan stared down at the watch again. I stopped going a lot of places. Walter nodded sadly. Grief does that. Ryan leaned back heavily in the chair while pale winter sunlight drifted across the frozen lake outside. Do you know what scares me most? Walter waited quietly. Ryan's voice lowered almost to a whisper. I think I became the kind of man my father spent his whole life trying not to become. The room fell silent after that except for the faint sound of wind brushing snow against the windows. Walter looked toward the photograph of Ryan's father smiling beside Thomas Carter before answering softly. Then maybe it is not too late to become someone else. Ryan stared at the broken watch resting silently in his hand while those words settled deep inside him like the first crack in ice beginning to thaw. Ryan Whitmore returned to Manhattan just before sunset. The city glowed gold beneath melting snow while thousands of office windows reflected the fading winter light across crowded streets below. But for the first time in years, Ryan did not go directly to Whitmore Holdings headquarters after arriving back in the city. He did not ask Daniel about pending contracts or investor calls or the board meeting everyone kept rescheduling around his sudden disappearance. Instead, he sat alone in the back seat of the town car, staring quietly at the repaired silver watch, now ticking softly against his wrist. Tick, tick, tick. The sound felt strangely alive inside the silence surrounding him. Earlier that afternoon, Ryan found an old watchmaker in a small Connecticut shop hidden beside a bookstore near the lake. The elderly man spent nearly 2 hours repairing the frozen mechanism, while Ryan waited silently beside shelves of antique clocks. Old watches are funny, the watchmaker said while adjusting the delicate gears beneath a magnifying lens. Sometimes they stop because of damage. He glanced up briefly. Sometimes they stop because nobody touches them for too long. Ryan thought about that sentence the entire drive back to Manhattan. By 6 o'clock, the car finally stopped outside the Halston Room, the same restaurant company hired for the birthday party 2 nights earlier. Warm lights spilled through the windows while customers filled the dining room with quiet conversation, and the smell of coffee and winter food drifted into the cold evening air. Ryan stepped out slowly beneath the glowing sign. No security team. No assistant. No luxury entrance reserved for executives. Just one man wearing a dark wool coat standing alone on a snowy Manhattan sidewalk, trying to gather enough courage to walk inside a restaurant. The hostess looked startled the moment he entered. Mr. Whitmore. Ryan gave a small polite nod. Good evening. She straightened immediately. We can prepare a private table upstairs if you would like. Ryan glanced around the restaurant quietly. Warm yellow lights. Families eating dinner. A couple laughing softly near the windows. A tired waitress carrying soup toward an older man sitting alone. Ordinary life. No, Ryan said gently. A normal table is fine. The hostess blinked in surprise, but nodded quickly. Of course. Ryan noticed several employees whispering quietly after recognizing him, but he ignored it. His eyes searched the room until they finally landed on Emily Carter near the far side of the dining area, refilling water glasses beneath soft chandelier light. She had not noticed him yet. Ryan suddenly felt nervous in a way billion-dollar negotiations never made him feel. The hostess guided him toward a simple corner table near the windows. Can I get you anything to drink? She asked carefully. Ryan glanced toward Emily again before answering softly. Coffee is fine. The hostess disappeared while Ryan loosened his coat slightly and rested one hand over the ticking watch beneath his sleeve. Tick, tick, tick. The sound grounded him somehow. A few minutes later, Emily approached carrying a coffee pot and notepad without looking up immediately. Good evening. Welcome to. Then she saw him. Her steps slowed slightly. Not dramatic surprise. Just quiet confusion beneath tired blue eyes. Mr. Whitmore. Ryan stood automatically the moment she reached the table. Emily looked mildly startled by that. Most powerful men did not stand up for waitresses. Hi, Ryan said softly. Emily glanced toward the empty chair. You came back. Ryan nodded once. I did. She poured coffee carefully into the cup in front of him while silence settled gently between them. Ryan noticed dark circles beneath her eyes tonight. Long shifts. Probably little sleep. Yet she still carried herself with the same calm grace that made people underestimate her entirely. How is the watch? She asked quietly. Ryan slowly pulled back his sleeve just enough to reveal the silver watch ticking softly beneath the restaurant lights. Emily stared at it for a second before smiling. A real smile this time. Warm. Honest. It works. Ryan looked down at it too. Yeah. His voice softened. It does. Emily placed the coffee pot gently against her tray. My father would have liked that. Ryan looked up at her carefully. I think I would have liked your father. Emily's expression shifted slightly at those words. Sadness mixed with gratitude. Ryan hesitated before speaking again. I went to the lake house today. Emily looked surprised. You did? Ryan nodded. Walter still keeps everything exactly the same. Emily smiled faintly. Some people protect memories by preserving rooms. Ryan looked around the quiet restaurant for a second before answering softly. And some people protect memories by returning watches. Their eyes held briefly before a customer called Emily's name from another table. She glanced over automatically. Duty first. Ryan noticed that too. Emily looked back toward him. I should get back to work. Ryan nodded slowly. Then before she could walk away, he spoke again. Emily. She paused. Ryan stood fully this time. Nearby conversations quieted slightly as several guests recognized him now. The billionaire CEO, standing beside an ordinary restaurant table, speaking to a waitress with visible sincerity. Ryan looked directly at her. "I owe you an apology." Emily stayed silent. Ryan continued quietly, "Honestly, at my party, I treated your gift like a joke because I assumed expensive things mattered more than meaningful ones." The restaurant around them grew softer somehow. Even the sounds of silverware seemed to slow. Ryan lowered his eyes briefly before continuing. "But the truth is your gift mattered more than everything else in that penthouse combined." Emily watched him carefully without interrupting. Ryan's voice dropped lower now. "And I also laughed because powerful people get used to believing they understand value better than everyone else." He looked back at her fully. "Turns out I was the poorest person in the room that night." Silence settled gently across the restaurant after that. Emily stared at him for several seconds before finally speaking softly. "Most people with power never admit when they are wrong." Ryan gave a faint, tired smile. Maybe because admitting it forces them to change afterward. Emily studied his expression carefully, then glanced toward the ticking watch beneath his sleeve. Tick, tick, tick. The sound seemed louder somehow beneath the restaurant lights. Finally, she smiled gently. "Maybe that is not such a bad thing." Ryan Whitmore returned to the Halston room 3 nights in a row after that conversation. Not for publicity, not for business dinners, not because reporters were watching. He came quietly near closing time, wearing simple dark coats without assistants trailing behind him, while Manhattan settled into winter evenings outside the restaurant windows. The staff noticed almost immediately. Billionaires did not usually become regular customers at places where they once hosted luxury parties. Especially not alone. On the 4th night, snow drifted softly beyond the glass while Ryan sat at the same corner table beside the window with black coffee untouched in front of him and the silver watch ticking steadily beneath his sleeve. Tick, tick, tick. He listened to it constantly now. The sound reminded him that life moved whether people paid attention or not. Emily approached carrying a small plate with pie and set it gently beside his coffee. Ryan looked up in surprise. "I did not order this." Emily gave a faint smile. "You also did not eat dinner." Ryan glanced down at the slice of apple pie. "How do you know?" Emily crossed her arms lightly. "You have been staring out the window for 40 minutes. Ryan almost smiled at that. "Maybe I like the snow." "Maybe." Her eyes softened slightly. "But grief also makes people forget they are hungry." The honesty in her voice carried no judgment, just recognition. Ryan leaned back slowly in his chair while soft jazz drifted through the restaurant speakers overhead. "You notice everything, do you know that?" Emily shrugged gently. "That is part of serving tables." Ryan shook his head once. "No, it is something else." Emily glanced toward the dining room, where a young couple laughed quietly over dessert beneath warm yellow lights. "People tell the truth in small habits," she said softly. "Most just do not slow down enough to notice." Ryan looked at her for a second longer than necessary. The city filled with loud, ambitious people constantly trying to prove themselves. But Emily Carter never seemed interested in attention at all. That calmness unsettled him in the best possible way. "You should sit down for a minute," he said quietly. Emily blinked in surprise. "I am working." Ryan glanced around the nearly empty restaurant. "It is after 10. I think civilization can survive one waitress taking a break." Emily laughed softly under her breath before finally sliding into the chair across from him. Ryan noticed immediately how tired she looked tonight. Not unhappy, just carrying too much responsibility for too long. "Long shift?" he asked gently. Emily nodded once. "Double shift." Ryan frowned slightly. "How many hours is that?" "About 14 today." Ryan stared at her. "That is insane." Emily smiled faintly. "That is New York." Silence settled comfortably between them for a moment while snow continued drifting outside. Ryan slowly pushed the untouched pie plate slightly toward her. "Then split this with me." Emily looked amused. "You are offering pie like a peace treaty." "Maybe it is." She studied him carefully before picking up a fork. The smallest smile touched Ryan's face watching her take the first bite. It felt strangely normal sitting here sharing pie with a waitress in a quiet restaurant, while snow fell outside Manhattan windows. More normal than any luxury party he attended in years. "Can I ask you something?" Emily said softly after a moment. Ryan nodded. "Why did you really come back here?" The question lingered gently between them. Ryan glanced down briefly at the ticking watch beneath his wrist before answering honestly. Because you reminded me of someone I used to want to become. Emily frowned slightly. Your father? Ryan looked toward the snow outside. The version of me he thought I would be. Emily stayed quiet. Ryan continued softly. After he died, everyone praised me for turning the company into something enormous. He laughed quietly without humor. But nobody ever asked whether I was becoming someone impossible to recognize along the way. Emily rested her fork carefully against the plate. And are you? Ryan thought about that for several long seconds, then finally answered truthfully. I think I was. The restaurant lights reflected softly against the windows beside them while distant traffic moved through snowy Manhattan streets below. Emily folded her hands gently together on the table. My father used to say success changes people slowly enough that they rarely notice it happening. Ryan looked at her carefully. Your father sounds wiser than most executives I know. Emily smiled sadly. He was a quiet man. Quiet people usually notice things loud people miss. Ryan nodded slowly because he finally understood exactly what she meant. Silence settled again between them, comfortable this time. Then suddenly the restaurant manager Martin appeared near their table, looking visibly nervous. Emily, he said carefully, can I speak with you for a second? Emily stood immediately. Of course. Ryan watched her disappear with Martin toward the kitchen hallway while something uneasy settled inside him. A few minutes later, raised voices drifted faintly from behind the kitchen doors. Not screaming, just tense enough to feel wrong. Ryan could not hear every word clearly, but one sentence reached him sharply through the restaurant noise. You were getting too comfortable around him. Ryan stood instantly. By the time he reached the hallway, Emily already walked back toward the dining room, carrying an empty tray with her usual composed expression restored. But Ryan noticed the slight tightness around her eyes immediately. What happened? He asked quietly. Emily shook her head lightly. Nothing important. Ryan looked toward the kitchen doors. Did he say something to you? Emily hesitated before answering carefully. Managers worry about appearances. Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. Meaning? Emily lowered her voice. He thinks people might assume I am using you for attention. Ryan stared at her in disbelief. Because you sat down for pie? Emily gave a tired smile. People become uncomfortable when class lines start looking human. The sentence hit Ryan harder than she probably intended. Because she was right. The moment powerful people treated workers like equals instead of background furniture, the room itself became uneasy. Ryan glanced around the warm restaurant filled with ordinary conversations and soft winter light. Then back at Emily standing quietly beside him, still holding an empty tray after 14 exhausting hours of work. Suddenly, he understood something his father figured out long before he ever did. Respect was not proven through speeches or money or expensive charity galas. It revealed itself in the small private moments when nobody important was watching. 3 weeks later, the first snowstorm of January covered Manhattan in white silence again. The city lights glowed softly through drifting snow while warm yellow windows reflected against icy sidewalks below. Inside Whitmore Holdings headquarters, executives hurried through marble hallways carrying laptops and schedules while assistants whispered anxiously about an emergency board meeting called personally by Ryan Whitmore that morning. Nobody knew exactly why. Rumors spread quickly anyway. Investors assumed another acquisition was coming. Some believed Ryan planned to announce expansion into Europe. Others thought he was preparing to sell part of the company after weeks of unusual behavior and canceled appearances. But when Ryan finally entered the boardroom at noon, wearing a simple dark suit and the repaired silver watch beneath his cuff, he carried no presentation slides at all, just a folded piece of paper in one hand. 20 executives fell silent immediately. Ryan looked around the enormous glass boardroom slowly before speaking. For years, he began quietly. This company measured success through revenue, market growth, and luxury. The executives exchanged confused looks. Ryan continued calmly. And we became very good at building beautiful places. He glanced briefly toward the snowy Manhattan skyline outside the windows. But somewhere along the way, we forgot how to value people who were not sitting in rooms like this one. Silence settled heavily across the table. Ryan unfolded the paper carefully. Starting today, Whitmore Holdings is launching the Thomas Carter Foundation. Several executives looked surprised at the unfamiliar name. Ryan noticed it immediately. Thomas Carter worked for my family for nearly 20 years. His voice remained steady. Most of you would have called him a driver. Ryan lowered his eyes briefly toward the ticking watch beneath his wrist. Tick, tick, tick. But he was also one of the kindest men I never took enough time to know. The room stayed completely silent now. Ryan continued. The foundation will provide scholarships, housing support, and emergency medical assistance for hotel workers and service employees across every Whitmore property in the country. One board member blinked in confusion. Service employees? Ryan looked directly at him. Yes. The man hesitated. That will cost millions annually. Ryan nodded once. Good. No one spoke after that. Because for the first time in years, Ryan Whitmore sounded less like a businessman protecting profits and more like a son trying to repair the parts of himself's success had quietly hollowed out. Across Manhattan that same afternoon, Emily Carter wiped down tables near the windows of the Halston room while soft jazz played overhead and snow drifted through the streets outside. The lunch crowd had slowed, leaving the restaurant peaceful for the first time all day. Sarah approached carrying a phone with wide eyes. Emily. Emily glanced up. What? Sarah held out the screen. Why is your billionaire friend all over the news? Emily frowned slightly before taking the phone. On the screen, Ryan stood beside a podium during the press conference wearing the silver watch clearly visible beneath his sleeve while reporters filled the room with flashing cameras. Emily stared quietly as Ryan's voice played through the video. The people carrying trays, cleaning rooms, driving cars, and serving meals are not invisible, he said calmly. They are the reason companies like mine exist at all. Sarah blinked dramatically beside her. Okay, either you change that man completely or rich people are getting emotional because of winter. Emily smiled faintly but said nothing. Because deep down, she understood something Sarah did not. Ryan had not changed overnight. Grief simply stopped allowing him to hide from himself anymore. That evening, just before closing time, the restaurant door opened softly beneath the falling snow. Emily looked up automatically from the counter. Ryan stepped inside carrying no assistance. No expensive overcoat draped across his shoulders this time. Only a small paper bag in one hand. Warm restaurant light reflected softly against the snow melting in his dark hair. You are becoming predictable, Emily said gently as he approached the counter. Ryan almost smiled. That sounds dangerous. Emily nodded toward the paper bag. What is that? Ryan placed it carefully on the counter between them. A gift. Emily blinked in surprise. For me? Ryan nodded once. Emily opened the bag slowly. Inside rested a simple wooden frame containing the repaired photograph of their fathers standing beside the frozen lake, smiling with paper coffee cups in their hands. Beneath the photograph, engraved quietly into the wood, were 4 words. Best conversations happen quietly. Emily stared at it silently for several seconds. Ryan watched her carefully. I thought maybe memories should stop living inside drawers. Emily looked up slowly, emotion softening her tired blue eyes. This is beautiful. Ryan glanced down briefly before answering. Your father gave my family more kindness than we deserved. Emily rested one hand gently against the frame. And your father gave mine dignity. Silence settled warmly between them while snow continued falling outside the windows. Ryan looked around the quiet restaurant. Empty tables, soft jazz, warm light, ordinary life. Then he looked back at Emily. You know something strange? Emily smiled faintly. Probably. Ryan touched the silver watch lightly beneath his sleeve while the ticking continued softly between seconds. For years I thought wealth meant owning expensive things. His voice lowered gently now. Turns out the most valuable moments in my life came wrapped in brown paper. Emily laughed softly under her breath. The sound felt lighter than before, less burdened somehow. Ryan glanced toward the snowy streets outside Manhattan while the warm restaurant lights reflected softly across the glass. Then finally he looked back at her with quiet honesty resting fully in his expression now. My father used to say people spend their whole lives chasing bigger clocks. He touched the old silver watch again gently. But the real tragedy is forgetting who you wanted to spend time with while the clock was still moving. The restaurant grew quiet after that except for soft jazz and the ticking watch beneath Ryan's sleeve. Tick, tick, tick. No longer frozen. No longer lost. And somewhere beyond the snow-covered city, 2 fathers who once shared quiet conversations over coffee had unknowingly given their children something far more valuable than money. A second chance to become fully human before time disappeared again.